Lonnie Franklin Jr., infamously known as the Grim Sleeper, was one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. His crimes terrorized South Los Angeles for decades and left a devastating impact on countless families and communities. Born on August 30, 1952, in Los Angeles, California, Franklin appeared to live a relatively ordinary life. He worked various jobs, including employment as a sanitation worker and auto mechanic. To neighbors and acquaintances, he often seemed like a normal family man. However, behind this facade was a predator responsible for a series of brutal murders. The nickname, the Grim Sleeper, was given to Franklin because investigators believed there was a long gap between his known killings. Authorities linked him to a string of murders that began in the mid-1980s and continued into the early 2000s. Most of his victims were women from vulnerable backgrounds, many of whom struggled with addiction or lived in difficult circumstances. Because of their social status and the neighborhoods where the crimes occurred, critics later argued that the investigations did not receive the urgency they deserved. Franklin's victims were typically approached in South Los Angeles. Investigators found patterns in the crimes, including the use of firearms and the disposal of victims' bodies in alleys, dumpsters, and other isolated locations. The murders created fear throughout the community, yet for years the killer remained unidentified. One of the reasons Franklin managed to avoid capture for so long was the limited forensic technology available during the early years of the investigation. Detectives collected evidence, but connecting the crimes and identifying a suspect proved extremely difficult. As time passed, advancements in DNA technology offered new hope. In 2010, investigators finally arrested Franklin after a breakthrough involving familial DNA searching. This technique allowed law enforcement to identify potential relatives of the unknown suspect through DNA databases. The evidence eventually led detectives to Franklin. Additional searches of his property uncovered photographs of numerous women, many of whom were never identified. These discoveries raised concerns that the full extent of his crimes might never be known. Franklin was charged with multiple murders and attempted murders. During his trial, prosecutors presented extensive forensic evidence linking him to the crimes. Testimony revealed the calculated nature of his actions and the suffering endured by his victims and their families. The case drew national attention and renewed discussions about how society responds to crimes involving marginalized communities. In 2016, Lonnie Franklin Jr. was convicted of 10 murders and 1 attempted murder. He was sentenced to death by a California court. The verdict brought a measure of justice to many families who had spent years seeking answers about their loved ones. However, the story did not end there. Questions remained regarding whether Franklin had additional victims beyond those included in the trial. Investigators continued examining evidence and reviewing unsolved cases that might have been connected to him. On March 28, 2020, Franklin was found unresponsive in his prison cell and was later pronounced dead. He was 67 years old. His death ended any possibility of learning the full truth directly from him, leaving some families without closure. The case of Lonnie Franklin Jr. remains significant not only because of the horrific nature of his crimes, but also because it exposed broader issues within the criminal justice system. Many observers argued that the victims were overlooked for too long because of their backgrounds and circumstances. The investigation became a reminder that every victim deserves equal attention, regardless of social status, race, or economic condition. Today, the legacy of the Grim Sleeper case is one of tragedy, perseverance, and the pursuit of justice. It serves as a sobering example of how a dangerous criminal was able to operate for years while remaining hidden in plain sight, and how advances in forensic science eventually helped bring him to justice. Wayne Adam Ford is an American serial killer whose crimes shocked California in the late 1990s. His case became widely known not only for the brutality of his actions, but also for the moment he voluntarily walked into a police station and confessed to murder. Born on December 3, 1961, Ford grew up in the United States and later served in the U.S. Marine Corps. After his military service, his life became unstable, marked by failed relationships and personal struggles. To the outside world, he did not initially appear to be someone capable of extreme violence. However, behind that ordinary image, he would later be linked to a series of horrific crimes. Between 1997 and 1998, Ford targeted vulnerable women, many of whom were sex workers or hitchhikers along highways in California. He would pick them up, take them to secluded areas, and kill them. His victims were later identified as at least 4 women, though investigators believed there could have been more. The murders were carried out with disturbing brutality, and in several cases, the bodies were dismembered, making the investigation even more complex. For months, law enforcement had no clear suspect. The victims were often individuals whose disappearances did not immediately trigger large-scale investigations. This allowed Ford to continue his crimes without immediate detection. However, his actions would eventually lead to an unexpected ending. On November 2, 1998, Wayne Adam Ford walked into the Humboldt County Sheriff's Office in California carrying a sealed plastic bag. Inside was a severed female breast. He immediately told officers that he had killed multiple women. This confession led to his arrest and opened the door to one of the most disturbing murder investigations in the state's history. Following his arrest, Ford provided details about his crimes. Investigators were able to link him to multiple victims based on his statements and forensic evidence. The case revealed a pattern of targeting vulnerable women and disposing of their bodies in remote locations. His confession helped authorities recover additional remains and close several missing persons cases. In 2006, Ford was brought to trial. The prosecution presented evidence of his confessions, physical evidence, and the remains of his victims. The defense argued mental health issues, but the evidence overwhelmingly supported the prosecution's case. Ford was ultimately convicted of 4 counts of murder. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court described his crimes as especially heinous, emphasizing the suffering of the victims and the calculated nature of his actions. His sentencing brought a measure of closure to the families involved, although the emotional impact of the crimes remained. The case of Wayne Adam Ford continues to be studied as an example of how dangerous offenders can operate undetected among society's most vulnerable populations. It also highlights the importance of forensic investigation and the role of confessions in solving complex cases. Today, Wayne Adam Ford remains incarcerated, and his case stands as a grim reminder of the violence that can exist beneath an unassuming exterior, and the lasting impact such crimes leave on victims, families, and communities.